The patrons have spoken, and we're doing something a little different. We're examining the mythical Pokemon. For those who might not know what mythical Pokemon are exactly, you probably grew up with the game pre-Gen 5 like us, where they were just legendary Pokemon. But there was always a distinction between legendary and mythical in Japan, a distinction that made itself known in the West starting in Black and White. Mythicals are related to legendaries but are distinct. If you'd like a list, it can be found easily on Cerebi. There are only 23 of them as of Gen 9. Anyways, the patrons have requested that we examine the 5 worst mythical Pokemon, and here we are. We must emphasize that these are not necessarily indictments of Pokemon within a specific tier, rather their stature as a whole. For instance, we're not analyzing 2 of the Pokemon on this list for how they do in PU, because they actually do quite decently there. It's more about their flaws that keep them that low as a whole. So with that in mind, join us in counting down the 5 worst mythical Pokemon of all time. Seeing a former Uber here might seem strange at first, but that speaks to how stringent the competition is when you're dealing with Mythicals. Celebi has got a lot of good going for it. Its move pool is incredible, despite its many weaknesses, and it also has a ton of valuable resists like water, electric, fighting, and ground, while Natural Cure is incredible for sponging status, and you can't really go wrong with that stat spread, especially for a Pokemon like Celebi, whose game plan isn't on the extreme end of things, rather more balanced. Yes, you could also do a lot better in the modern era, and there's not much reason to suspect that it'd be especially great in the Power Crept Gen 9, especially with the halving of Recovery PP, but there's only so far you can truly fall with this level of what we can call baseline competence in the stat department, alongside the incredible game-changing moves that are Stealth Rock, U-Turn, Healing Wish, and Nasty Plot. Now, Celebi is far from complete junk. Really, almost nothing on this list truly is, but it is indeed on this list, not only because it has seen far better days, but because it struggles to match the impact of its fellow Mythicals. And when you consider how monumentally impactful the flaws are, it isn't that surprising. Switch moves have ruled the singles metagame for more generations than they haven't at this point, with it getting easier than ever to stack excellent users together, and in this vein, Celebi's utterly brutal U-turn weakness is particularly damning. That's just the beginning too. Its weakness to Dark is also effortlessly exploitable in a world with knockoff around every corner. Its weakness to Ghost is even worse, given the type's dominance over the game, and its weakness to Fire and Ice mean it's generally at risk of getting, if not outright shattered, badly bruised enough to seriously throw a wrench into its functioning. Long gone are the days where it largely had to contend with non-stab hidden power ices and ice punches in this regard. Now, plenty of Pokemon have plenty of abusable weak points, so why is it so bad for Celebi? Well, such Pokemon with plenty of weak points generally compensate for it by doing something in particular really well. Think of how, say, Weavile and Shanpao are frail, riddled with weaknesses, yet they are so strong and powerful, they compensate for the fact that they generally can't take hits at all. Remember that more balanced approach Celebi has? Well, it prevents it from being outright bad, but it also means it doesn't quite possess the capacity for extremes it needs to overcome the flaws that only become more prevalent. Something like Nasty Plot Leaf Storm sounds threatening and hard-hitting on paper, and it certainly isn't weak, but it still doesn't possess the kind of stunning power desired even by lower tiers at this point. At least not relative to the hoops you have to jump through to guard it against the weaknesses lurking around every corner. Still, all things considered, Celebi's got it pretty good. Deserving of this list, yes, but outright bad, not quite. At least not yet. Meloetta is a highly interesting, unique Pokemon. It's got 2 forms, but they're not ones you choose before going into battle like you would Giratina Altered or Origin. Instead, it is more comparable to Necrozma Duskmane or Dawnwings and Ultra Necrozma, in that it starts out in its base Aria form, but then can transform into its Pirouette form mid-battle. Said Pirouette form not only has different typing, going from the original's normal Psychic to normal Fighting, but has a different stat spread and transforms through the use of the move Relic Song. Its signature 75 base power special normal move with perfect accuracy and a 10% chance to sweep the opponent. Except Meloetta has Serene Grace, so it's actually 20%, and if you've ever seen Jirachi's Psychic or Tyranitar's Crunch drop an opponent's defenses, you'll know how strong such odds are. The main appeal though is to transform Meloetta. Its Aria form is decently fast at 90 base speed, while packing an immense 128 base special attack, almost the same as Keldeo, as well as impressive base 128 special defense. It deals damage mostly in its stab Psychic, sometimes Hyper Voice as well, alongside various forms of coverage between Focus Mist, Shadow Ball, Thunderbolt, and Grass Knot, augmented further by the likes of Calm Mind Trick or U-Turn. However, in its pirouette form, it didn't just change typing, it changed playstyle. Instead of the strong psychic special attacker with mid-range speed, it becomes a strong fighting physical attacker with incredible speed. The 128 base attack was to be expected, putting it almost on par with another fast hard-hitting fighter, Terrakion. But what was really excellent was its base 128 special, which was absolutely incredible for any Pokemon, let alone something packing stab close combat, as well as a strong secondary stab in return and the excellent coverage of Ice Punch. Best of all, you wouldn't know which type of Meloetta you were facing from Team Preview, since it always started out in its Aria form. You wouldn't know it if it was planning on transforming or not until it actually attacked, and given the vast differences between the two, this uncertainty could often leave you careening to figure out how to answer it, much like trying to figure out Mega Charizard X versus Y. And also, like the Megazard duel, even once you know which one it is, Meloetta's hard-hitting prowess means it's going to be tough to take on regardless, theoretically anyway. In practice, that doesn't quite work out, which is how Meloetta made its way onto this list. Here's the main issue with that whole Relic Song transformation deal. As soon as Pirouette Meloetta switches out, it reverts to its Aria form, meaning you have to either commit to not switching it out once it transforms into Pirouette, which is silly, because scary though it is, it's not going to be mowing down everything in its path, nor will it even do enough damage before going down to justify the sacrifice, or whenever you come back in, you have to take another turn to transform into Relic Song, except now the opponent knows it's coming and can attack you much more easily, because there is no threat from the physically invested Meloetta that remains in its Aria form. Think of it somewhat akin to Mega Charizard X that also needed to Dragon Dance in order to Mega Evolve before it could do any meaningful damage every time it came in. This is incredibly impractical and easy to stop. Plus, as dangerous as Meloetta may be after setup, it's not that dangerous. It's not particularly frail, but it's certainly not bulky and immediately undoes any goodwill it has in this department the second it uses close combat and its defense drops. Its speed may be amazing, but it doesn't help it against Priority and Scarfer. While it's not quite enough of a one-hit kill machine to automatically muscle through bulky Pokemon, maybe if it got Swords Dance, but alas. Okay, then what about Aria Meloetta? No need to transform, just straight up psychic attacking without any requirements. Well, this is actually how Meloetta gets used competitively, and it's quite solid in many of the lower tiers, but the problem is that it is, when all is said and done, quote-unquote just a good psychic special attacker. Nothing mind-blowing. Yeah, it's powerful, but only has okay speed. Its special defense and HP are superb, and it's a particularly great user of Assault Vest, but its low defense means it's similarly vulnerable to other psychics in this regard, especially in tandem with its speed stat being what it is. It does relish being a psychic type who's half normal, which actually makes it immune to Ghost, which is simply incredible, but on the other hand, it's also a psychic type that doesn't resist fighting, making it even easier to revenge kill physically. It's a fine Pokemon all things considered, but relative to its mythical competition, it's pretty low. Alright, to be clear, we're talking about base Hoopa here, and definitely not its Unbound form. Hoopa is an interesting case because it's got a monstrous base 150 special attack alongside Ghost Stab. This means its Stab Shadow Ball, one of the most overwhelming forces in competitive play for some time, is hitting harder than Spectrier. There are mountains of differences between these Pokemon, of course, but Hoopa doesn't have the issue of not going hard enough to a certain extreme, conceptually anyhow, as given its other flaws, it might still struggle even if that special attack was pumped even further. As it stands though, it is hilarious to see this Pokemon with such a special attack stat populating the depths of PU in Gen 9, while previously hanging out in RU in Gen 6 and 7. And it doesn't even completely fall under the Rampardos theorem, because it's not paper thin and dirt slow. Its HP and special defense are the exact same as its Unbound form, that is, respectable HP alongside enormous special defense. Meanwhile, its base 70 speed, while certainly not amazing, is more than serviceable for a wall breaker of such potential. After all, something like Crawdon is a feared attacker in ORAS OU, and several generations of UU, while currently in Gen 9's RU, with its base 55 speed, and its bulk is pretty pitiful too. Plus, Pursuit was even removed from the game, so why's Hoopa got it so rough? Well, Pursuit may be gone, but if you think Celebi's knockoff vulnerability is bad, with its single weakness and good HP, and bulk, and even speed for that matter, that's nothing to how automatically Hoopa drops to the move with its quadruple weakness and complete inability to take a physical hit to begin with. Indeed, the latter flaw follows it everywhere. Oh, and that's not even its only quadruple weakness. We mentioned Hoopa has the stab that's been driving the competitive world crazy for generations now, Ghost. Well, it is also 4 times weak to that same stab itself. As a result, that neat special bulk is all too easy to bypass. Being this vulnerable to not 1 but 2 of the scariest attacks in the game is a big problem, especially at base 70 speed. Again, it's not bad, but it's not compensating sufficiently. Well, okay, but how about we keep Hoopa away from the hits and just focus on it dishing out the power? That's the thing. If you have to try to keep it away from hits, you really limit what it can actually come in against, and so its actual damage done doesn't wind up being as impactful as the potential of its special attack and dual stabs would suggest. Even this is somewhat of an issue because as power creep continues, Hoopa's power becomes increasingly less overwhelming. It's not weak by any means, but considering the base power of its stabs, it's not a one-hit KO machine as much as a 2-hit KO machine, and that makes all the difference given its stature. That's the difference between it and Crawdon or even Hoopa Unbound. Now, Hoopa is still quite a fine lower tier bruiser, but as far as its mythical competition goes, it's on the lower end of things. What was once an impressive array of traits in Generation 4 hasn't really been updated since, and so Shaman has suffered for it, having tumbled spectacularly from getting banned from UU and achieving significant OU status in Gen 4 to having a niche in Black and White 1 OU while being a defining superb Pokemon in UU to falling to RU in Gen 6 but at least being strong enough to get banned to staying in RU in Gen 7 but at least being great there, skipping Gen 8 and marking its return in Gen 9 by dropping not to NU, not to PU, but all the way down to untiered. You may wonder what makes Shaman so much worse than a Pokemon it has often competed with and been compared to. Number 5 on this list, Celebi. Well, as we mentioned, Celebi somewhat compensates for its flaws with its game-changing array of moves. Of those moves, Shaman only shares with it Healing Wish, which is of course an amazing move, but generally, a Pokemon whose greatest use is the Healing Wish, which is sacrificing yourself for a teammate by the way, is not going to be a Pokemon you want to use a lot. The ever-menacing face of power creep demands vast swaths of utility from every team slot, and being there just to revive one of your other teammates is simply not enough, to say nothing of the fact that it's not a guarantee that Healing Wish will be useful as you'd like, which is why you want the Healing Wisher to give you some sort of utility beyond the self-sacrifice. There have been Pokemon whose main utility was Healing Wish before, most notably Latias in Gen 6 OU, but as much Latias sets tended to switch in once or twice max before sacrificing themselves, they also provided other utility prior to going down, most notably Defog, but Thunderwave and Trick were options, while also switching in against major threats like Keldeo, Mega Charizard Y, and even Gliscor if packing Ice Beam. Shaman's utility profile is not nearly so vast, even by PU standards now. The next most impactful support move it has is Leech Seed, which, once upon a time, was indeed enough to carry a role all on its own. In these starker days though, not so much. Well, why does it have to have such an emphasis on support, you may wonder? Isn't this the Pokemon with the signature move Seed Flare? Yes, but it's not backed by the monster special attack it needs to land any sort of impact, nor are their coverage options particularly impressive. They're certainly fine, one can't really argue against Earth Power, but it, Air Slash, and Dazzling Gleam are all begging for more power beyond just the boosts of Life Orb and Choice Specs. The loss of Hidden Power stung too, even though its base power was even more lacking. Terra Blast is nice, but takes a lot of commitment to not necessarily even solve the issue. Even Seed Flare's 40% special defense drop rate can't necessarily carry them given its imperfect accuracy and 8 PP. Heck, this is what, in conjunction with the rise of Clefable and return of Latias, led to Shaman no longer being used in Diamond and Pearl OU either, as if its cross-generational fall wasn't sad enough. If it had more PP with which to threaten these drops, neither Clef, Latias, nor any of their switch-happy teammates would have nearly as easy a time stalling it out, or for that matter, if it had more power to begin with. Growth doesn't really solve these issues either. The paltry +1 isn't quite doing the job, even with Life Orb and the turn required to be threatening, as well as the strain on an already limited moveset is even worse. Basically, Shaman is too heavily burdened by its balanced approach in a time where greater extremes are needed, and unlike Celebi, doesn't pack the moves required to make some sort of impact stick in spite of its flaws. And here we have the clear losers. Phione and Meltan, being pre-evolutions of mythical Pokemon, are most definitely the worst mythicals of all time. While technically Phione isn't quite a pre-evolution of Manaphy, since it doesn't actually evolve into it, it's just what happens when you breed Manaphy with a Ditto, but same difference. Indeed, this video originally was slated to be a how good was Phione actually, but seeing as it has never ever been viable anywhere, we asked the patrons to reconsider, and here we are. So why has Phione never been viable anywhere? Well, it has what we would call Luminion syndrome, a condition afflicting mono water types with excessively generic move pools that fail to distinguish themselves within the oversaturated sea of their competition. The first instinct with Phione is, well, I'll use it as a mini Manaphy. How bad could that be in a lower tier and everything? Problem was that even in Diamond and Pearl, the least power crept gen it existed in, 80 base stats across the board didn't cut it. Even the other Pokemon with that stat spread, Glalie, was better off despite packing inferior mono ice typing, because it had supremely impactful moves in Spikes, Explosion, and even Taunt. Phione, meanwhile, doesn't really impact the game on that level directly, or assist its teammates like those moves do beyond the Rain Dance it wants to set for itself, otherwise known as the Rain Dance that practically everything not a fire type gets. Sure, the status cure of hydration is cool and all, but that's really all Phione has going for it. Its rain boosted surfs don't land with much impact. As like Manaphy, it doesn't even have Hydro Pump. Not that it helped that much, given its generally unimpressive power, bulk, speed, and support, aka mediocrity in all 4 areas in a game where you've generally gotta have at least 2 good things going for you. But unlike Manaphy, Phione lacks a method of boosting itself further. Forget Tail Glow, it doesn't even get Calm Mind. A Surf, Rain Dance, Rest, Calm Mindset, that would be something at least in Diamond and Pro NU. Rain Dance alone though, forget it. Phione never stood a chance. Meltan is actually an interesting case because it does do something that its evolution Melmetal cannot. With its Magnet Pull ability, it traps steel types, a trait so valuable it ensured the Magnezone line has had work ever since it was Magneton alone being used to drop Skarmory Gen 3 OU. The problem? Meltan's stats are appallingly low, and its move pool is incredibly sparse as well. It is, and this is no exaggeration, completely and utterly useless. At least Phione can kind of play at being a water like other waters, but Meltan can't do anything. You actually would be better off using Magnemite. Heck, you'd be better off using Nosepass. You'd be better off using no Steel Trapper at all than using Meltan to do the job. And we know it's a bit harsh to condemn it and Phione like this considering they are unrealized potential, but for this reason they are unequivocally the worst mythical Pokemon of all time, and sadly, neither of them are even allowed in Little Cup. And that's it. We think this list is quite robust, and as always, we welcome hearing differences in opinion. Perhaps you have a personal vendetta against Zarude, Zeraora, or another one of the Mythicals. Maybe you think Hoopa and Shaman should switch places. Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. We might even return to the Mythical format for a video in the future. Its limited, legendary nature makes the competition especially fierce. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Bingleton, Daniel Isbeast, Dr. Mint, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Nurse Jake, Jack G, Lord of the Rabbit, Skylaria, Soares and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Kiboflu, and Quetzalcoatl Northropi for their major support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.